The Adams Archive.
The FBI posted on January 15th of 2024, this MLK Day, the FBI honors one of the most prominent leaders of the civil rights movement and reaffirms its commitment to Dr. King's legacy of fairness and equal justice for all. Well, guess what? That got hit with a community note. And I will share it with you because it's absolutely hilarious. And I'm so glad that this exists. Here it is. Let me go ahead and share it on the screen for you here. So here's the tweet from the FBI. And here is the community note, which says, the FBI engaged in surveillance of King, attempted to discredit him, and used manipulation tactics to influence him to stop organizing. King's family believed the FBI was responsible for his death. Praise the community notes gods that this got posted, because in one community note on X, they absolutely obliterated the FBI. Absolutely obliterated them. This has to go down as the single greatest community note in Twitter X history, is the fact that the FBI got community noted as being the potential perpetrator of Martin Luther King's death directly under their tweet. Now, I would love to go look at the comments of that because that has 3.7 million views. But this leads us into our next conversation. Did the FBI assassinate Martin Luther King? Well, by the end of this, hopefully you have your answer, because I know mine. So let's begin this at the very beginning of the situation. I'll give you a brief breakdown, and then we'll walk through some of the pieces that we pick up along the way. All right, so I have some of this written down, so bear with me, but I wanted to organize this in a way that was easy to understand the totality of this situation, because once you get into the details, whether it's JFK's assassination, whether it's Martin Luther King's assassination, whether it's Bobby Kennedy's assassination, whether it's John Lennon, all of these become so complex and confiscated because that's the goal. All they need to do is create enough doubt around the situation that they can just continue doing their job. So here we go. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of a story that, quite frankly, the mainstream media is too timid to touch. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Now, you all know the official story, the one that's been neatly packaged and sold to us by the FBI for years. But what if I told you there's another side to that story, one that's been shrouded in government secrets and mystery? First, let's set the scene. Martin Luther King, the face of the civil rights movement, a man who was no stranger to the specter of death. In 1958, he survived a near fatal stabbing. In 1963, post JFK's assassination, he eerily predicts a similar fate for himself. This isn't just a footnote in history. It's a chilling prelude to what's to come. Now, fast forward to 1968, King and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference comrades are in Memphis, Tennessee, advocating for the rights of sanitation workers. It's a noble cause, but it turns out to be King's last. On April 4th, at the Lorraine Motel Room, room 306, a room that practically had King's name on it, his life is tragically cut short by a sniper's bullet. The FBI story? James Earl Ray, a convicted criminal, acted alone. Sound familiar? But let's not be so quick to swallow the narrative. Ray is captured, and the stories we're fed is that he's a lone, racist gunman. But hold on. Ray soon recants his confession, reclaiming that he was just a pawn in a larger game orchestrated by a shadowy figure named Raul. This is where the plot thickens. Consider this. The King family, not satisfied with the official account, starts digging deeper. They uncover enough anomalies and inconsistencies to file a lawsuit against Lloyd Jowers and various government entities, alleging a sprawling conspiracy behind King's assassination. And in a stunning turn of events, they win the case. Testimonies during the trial implicate not just Jowers, but also the FBI, the CIA, the U.S. Army, and even elements of the mafia. Now let's talk about the evidence. The rifle that was supposedly linked Ray to the crime scene was never conclusively matched to the bullet that killed King. So, the bullet that was lodged in King's head when he died was not a match to the specific rifle that James Earl Ray allegedly used. Now, then there's the mystery pattern of deaths and intimidations. Witnesses, key figures, anyone who dared to challenge the official narrative met with untimely and suspicious ends. Also sounds familiar to JFK's, now doesn't it? Is this just a series of coincidences, or does it point to a desperate attempt to silence the truth? Ray's own story, frankly, is riddled with holes. Here's a man with a limited understanding of firearms, a low military marksmanship score, suddenly pegged as a mastermind, capable of executing one of the most significant assassinations in American history. We start to ask some more questions. Then there's the hasty manner in which Ray was pinned as the lone assassin almost immediately. Authorities find him and case closed. But the discrepancies are glaring. Questions about the ballistic evidence, the rush to judgment, the odd sequence of events post-assassination is a jigsaw puzzle with far too many missing pieces. Now consider the broader context. This is the 1960s, a time of turmoil, of government distrust, of agencies known for covert operations and dirty tricks. The King's family lawsuit and the subsequent verdict didn't just raise eyebrows, they blew the lid off the official story, suggesting that Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination was not the act of a lone, hate-driven gunman, but the outcome of a deep-rooted, multi-layered government conspiracy. So let's dive deeper. Ray's narrative of being manipulated by Raul presents a picture of a man who was unknowingly set up to be the fall guy in an assassination that was part of a larger and darker agenda. This Raul character, who remains shrouded in mystery, is said to have directed Ray's actions, including the purchase of the alleged murder weapon. It begs the question, was Ray just a pawn in a much more complex game of high-stakes political chess? And let's not just gloss over the rapid response that was given in conclusion by authorities. Almost immediately after King's assassination, the focus narrows on Ray, with little exploration into any alternative leads or motives. The evidence, such as the mismatched ballistics, Ray's lack of fingerprints in the alleged sniper's nest, and his dubious claim from escape from prison, paints a picture of convenient scapegoating rather than a thorough investigation. The mainstream media also ignores the broader climate of the time, a period rife with political assassinations, civil unrest, and a deep mistrust of government agencies. In this context, the idea of a government-linked conspiracy doesn't seem so far-fetched, does it? The King family, meanwhile, steadfastly maintained that Ray was not the true assassin. They contended that his role was merely a diversion, a cover for a larger conspiracy involving government agencies and other powerful entities. Their victory in the civil trial against Lloyd Jowers and various government entities wasn't just a win in court. It was a public declaration that the truth about King's assassination was far more complex than the world was led to believe. Now, let's talk about the aftermath. But before we do that, I do want to discuss one thing. Who was this Jowers fellow? Lloyd Jowers was an individual who was connected with the mafia, who alleged during this court hearing that he was given $100,000 to hire a hitman to kill Martin Luther King. He was told at the time that he was given that money that there would be no police presence around. They told him the exact place for him to be in, And when you look deeper and deeper into the situation with Martin Luther King, there's a ton of questions around this. First of all, being they moved Martin Luther King Jr. from his existing hotel room into another one with a balcony view. Interesting. Also, within this time, there was government assets on the ground in the area surrounding him. Not some security force, just random government assets on the ground, similar to what would we say, I don't know, February 7th? Is that what they say? Or January 8th? What's that date again? So there's more and more questions to be asked here, right? Now, and again, the connection between the government, the CIA, and the mafia is so bizarre during this time. You talk about all of the situation with Jack Ruby when it comes to JFK and the connection there. It just seems consistently a narrative that the CIA was working alongside the mafia to conduct these types of hits. So let's look at the aftermath of King's assassination and the series of mysterious deaths that followed. Key witness individuals with potentially damaging information suddenly and conveniently got out of the picture. It's a pattern that's too consistent to be mere coincidence. It's almost as if someone was tying up loose ends, ensuring the official narrative stayed unchallenged. Let's not forget the peculiar handling of the crime scene, the swift removal of potential evidence, like the tree obstructing the alleged shooter's view, and the immediate intense focus on Ray as the sole perpetrator. It's as if the authorities were more interested in closing the case than covering the full story. This is where the mainstream media often falls short. They don't dig deeper. They question the narrative handed to them, but that's not how we operate here. We look at the facts, the inconsistencies, and we ask the tough questions. So, let's look at some more of these details here.
November 1964. After their earlier efforts to discredit Martin Luther King Jr. are unsuccessful, the FBI prepares to send Dr. King an anonymous package containing a document that will come to be known as the Poison Pen Letter.
Dun, dun,
FBI
dun.
Intelligence Chief Bill Sullivan himself takes some plain, unmarked paper and, pretending to be an American Negro, types out an anonymous threatening letter addressed simply King.
The letter began by calling Dr. King a fraud and warned that the demise of his reputation among the public was fast approaching. The package also contained an audio tape, a compilation of FBI surveillance allegedly of King engaging in multiple extramarital affairs. The document's ominous closing, according to some scholars, suggested that Dr. King was given a deadline of 34 days to take his own life or suffer the humiliation of the tape's release.
The interpretation of this by the people that investigated the FBI later, and by just about everybody who has gone through these records, believes that they intended for him to commit suicide.
The FBI sent the package anonymously to Dr. King on November 21st, 1964. But it went unopened for over a month because King was in Oslo, Norway, accepting the Nobel Prize.
The first person to eventually open Sullivan's threatening package long after Christmas is Mrs. King. King and his associates, when they listen...
There you go. So, the FBI went to blackmail, that is blackmailed Martin Luther King Jr. to try to get him to commit suicide in order to escape the humiliation of his own infidelity. And we talked about honeypot schemes when it came to Jeffrey Epstein in our last episode, and it seems to be the case here. All they did was, potentially had somebody go and show a lot of interest in him that was very attractive for lots of money, had them sleep with her, him sleep with her, and then recorded the transaction that was occurring. And now they have blackmail to get him to do whatever they want. Now, obviously, it's probably not a fair exchange to either die or suffer humiliation of being an adulterer, but they thought it was enough. And so, and they're still doing this today, right? We saw that with the anthrax. Like, they would even go further lengths than this to get their way. And their way has not changed, whether it was back then or today. They're still doing the same things, guaranteed. Maybe it's changed technologically in the fashions that they're doing it in, but it's the same old tactics. It's the same old company that has been doing this since their inception in 1947. Right? And I think the FBI is obviously a different time than the CIA. So I'm thinking CIA there. But same difference, right? So that goes into the next conversation, which is surrounding who was James Earl Ray and why do we think he's innocent? So let's bring up that and we'll discuss that video, because here it is. And this is actually from the trial which occurred that we were discussing this entire time. And let's go ahead and here we go. Let's watch it.
Item of evidence, to wit, the rifle that allegedly a comparison was conducted of the bullet material removed from Dr. King with the 12 test bullets that could be adequately analyzed. This comparison revealed that the gross and unique characteristic signature left on the 12 test bullets by the James Earl Ray rifle was not present on the death bullet.
There you have it.
If you were to say, Mr. Hathaway, what are your recommendations here today? I would say continue on, attempt the cleaning. It may or may not help. And secondly, I would attempt to get those FBI tests to see the earlier test compared to the test of 30 years later.
This is them conducting the testing for the ballistics to match when they fire the rifle. Which forensic science in the 90s and earlier was such horseshit. And I'm speaking about things that sucked then and suck now. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's much better now than it was. But just seeing these guys sit in the lab and being like, "Well, there's no scratchies on here, and so there's scratchies on that one. He must have killed him."
As you see them now, and we're going to be stopping them at different points.
What I'm going to do is take it up to slightly higher.
And that's what we're going to be working with.
There you go. So that was just the forensic science surrounding it. Let's see if there's any other conclusion. Here you go.
Yeah,
As you can see, we can get much better.
but you have to make your own evaluation on that. Of course, I think there's other ways you might come to, the same conclusion on different ways.
All right. So there you have it. There's the video of the ballistics and forensic science surrounding the rifle not matching either. And then to top it all off, let's finish out with this video here from 1977, listening to James Earl Ray himself.
So you heard the news on the radio? Is that the way you heard it? So you were driving, you left that gas station at 2nd and Linden, what, about 6 or?
I don't have any way of knowing. I think it's around that time, but I don't even know if it's Linden. I know the approximate area it is. And I've seen the map on the Enquirer.
And you were going back to pick up this man that you say is Raul?
No, I just waiting the car back.
So you heard all this confusion, turned and flipped on the radio. They said Dr. King's been shot. Did you think you were set up at that point?
No, I was headed toward New Orleans when I had the radio on. I used to keep the radio on. I think I didn't have too strong feelings about the shooting.
When you met Raul, you didn't know any other name for him. That's the name that he said was his, and that's all you ever knew.
Yeah, I did. Just know.
And you met him where?
Canada.
Up in Canada. And you just met in a saloon, or?
It was a saloon in a waterfront area of Montreal.
You never became good friends then?
No, I wouldn't go Trenton.
Mm-hmm.
Just business.
Mm-hmm.
These were all aliases, I assume.
You don't think Raoul was a real name at all, then? Huh?
No, I've got some Freedom of Information papers in there saying there's a Raul San Diego or something in New Orleans, supposed to be a him, but I don't have the FBI. That's material from the FBI files, but I don't have nothing to substantiate that.
So you think their mind was made up when they got you?
Well, it had to be made up. They couldn't. Well, I don't know if there's any penalty for extraditing someone fraudulently or not, but.
So there's his discussion around who the figure was that was Raul that helped to set him up, that gave him the money to purchase the hitman and basically set up the whole scheme for him that was the liaison between him and either the organized crime organizations and the FBI. So that's the story in a nutshell, right? There's lots of little minute details. There's documentaries that have been done on this that you can go check out yourself. But I wanted to give you that higher level. There was a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things that came up, that changed, that caused Martin Luther King to find himself in that situation. In that time, that was the strings being pulled by these organizations. So I had a few of them written down from some of my research on this. And it starts like this. So the FBI wiretapped and spied on Martin Luther King. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover tried to blackmail Martin Luther King, and the FBI covered up his death and investigated themselves. In a 1999 civil trial, they determined the FBI was involved in his assassination. Sure, we talked about that. Then they created a federal holiday in his name, right? Besides that, let's look at some of these here. The King family friend and attorney William F. Pepper won the civil trial, which found that the U.S. government agencies were guilty of being part of a conspiracy that resulted in the wrongful death and assassination of Dr. King. The damning positive evidence, or body of evidence presented to the jury during this trial suggests that U.S. governmental complicity, which the jury obviously found extremely credible and included testimony about the following. The U.S. 111th Military Intelligence Group were at Dr. King's location during the assassination. The 20th Special Forces Group had an 8-man sniper team at the assassination location that day. Usual Memphis police special bodyguards were advised that they weren't needed on the day of the assassination. Regular and constant police protection for Dr. King was removed from protecting Dr. King just an hour before the assassination. Military intelligence set up photographers on the roof of a fire station with clear view of Dr. King's balcony. Dr. King's room was changed from a secure first-floor room to an exposed balcony room. Memphis police ordered the scene where multiple witnesses reported as the source of shooting cut down on their bushes that would have hit a sniper. So Memphis police ordered the scene where multiple witnesses reported as the source of shooting to cut down the bushes that would have hid a sniper. Along with sanitizing a crime scene, police abandoned investigative procedure to interview a witness who lived by the scene of the shooting. The rifle Mr. Ray delivered was not a match to the bullet that killed Dr. King and was not sighted to accurately shoot. So there's some additional evidence from this trial that came out. And obviously that's pretty damning. And it goes right alongside the situation. You know, you talk about John Lennon being assassinated this way for speaking out against the war machine. You talk about JFK. You talk about all of these people that were speaking out to power, finding themselves in the same situation. Now, here's an interesting thread, and this will be fairly quick. And it comes from somebody on X. So again, take it with a grain of salt. But it says that born in 1929, Michael King was the son of a black preacher known as Daddy King. In 1935, Daddy King renamed himself after Protestant reformer Martin Luther, subsequently changing Michael's name to Martin Luther King Jr., none of which was legalized in court. So his real name was not Michael, it was Martin Luther King Jr. Interesting. The there's a Martin Luther King Jr. was a notorious plagiarizer. So that I've typed up a few examples below. However, there are many such cases. The first public sermon that King gave in 1947 at the Ebenezer Baptist Church was plagiarized from a homily by Protestant clergyman Harry Emerson Fosdick entitled "Life is What You Make It." The first book that King wrote, Stride Toward Freedom, was plagiarized from numerous sources, all unattributed, according to documentation released and assembled by sympathetic King scholars. 4 senior editors to the papers of Martin Luther King Jr. stated that Martin's writings were at both Boston University and Crozer Theological Seminary, judged retroactively by standards of academic scholarship, are tragically flawed by numerous instances of plagiarism. Okay, we get the point. As long as it's not the "I have a dream" speech, right? King's PhD dissertation, a comparison of the conceptions of God in the thinking of Paul Tillich and Harry Nelson Wyman, contains more than 50 complete sentences plagiarized from the PhD dissertation by Dr. Jack Boozer. According to the Martin Luther King Papers, an official publication of the Martin Luther King Center of Nonviolent Social Change, whose staff includes Widow Coretta, in King's dissertation, only 49% of sentences in the section on Tillich contained 5 or more words that were King's own. Okay, so plagiarizer, right? Probably many people back then when they're going through school. Probably many people today using ChatGPT. This says that there's a article that says, "Trained, handled, and surrounded by Jewish Bolsheviks." And it points to a old newspaper article. I can't exactly make out the. Let's see if I can get in here. The Augusta Courier from August and from Augusta, Georgia. It says Martin Luther King at Communist Training School. The article says, let's see. Yeah, we'll move on from that, but interesting. I've typed up a few examples of the communist infiltration of King's movement below. Most notable is the fact that every move MLK made was dictated and approved by the Jewish handler Stanley Levinson, who referred to King as a slow thinker and refused to let him act alone. Interesting. In fact, the entirety of the civil rights movement was largely orchestrated and funded by Jews. What? Many examples of this can be found in Benjamin Ginsberg's The Fatal Embrace. I will list a few below. I mean, I'll take it at face value, I guess, but I'd have to do more research to substantiate that. Examples of the Jewishness of the civil rights movement found in Benjamin Ginsberg's The Fatal Embrace. Jewish organizations worked closely with civil rights groups during the 1960s in their struggles on behalf of voting rights and for the desegregation of public facilities and accommodations. Jewish contributors provided a substantial share of the funding for such civil rights groups, such as the NAACP and CORE. Jewish attorneys were at the forefront of the legal offensive against the American apartheid system, and Stanley Levinson, a longtime official and fundraiser of the American Jewish Congress, became Martin Luther King's chief aide and advisor, having previously served as a major fundraiser for Bayard Rustin. Interesting. Jack Greenberg, head of the NAACP legal defense, was the most important civil rights attorney in the United States. And let's see. Jewish individuals were, okay, I don't see it. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? Because remember, diversity is such a blessing to America, it had to be enforced at gunpoint by the 101st Airpoint Division in Little Rock, Arkansas, during the forced racial integration of high schools in 1957. Yeah, but it still should be done, right? Like what? Martin Luther King Jr. was also a well-known sexual degenerate. Evidence was made available to the public when Trump instructed the National Archives to release documents pertaining to JFK's assassination. And again, not wholeheartedly buying much of this, but although this is obviously true, the FBI documents that were unsealed, but I'm not sure if it goes into detail on the sexual deviancy of him. It says he typed up some of the information regarding King's degeneracy below. Evidence was also provided that King frequently used grant money to pay for alcohol, drugs, and prostitutes. Worth noting that the man most responsible for the FBI probe into MLK was an assistant director, William C. Sullivan. Sullivan describes himself as a liberal and says that initially I was 100% for King because I saw him as an effective and badly needed leader. Okay, not seeing the sexual deviancy. In February 1968, while running a workshop on urban leadership in Miami, King hired prostitutes with funds from the Ford Foundation. He then engaged in binge drinking and group sex acts, which the FBI describes as deviating from the normal. Okay. The FBI relates how King participated in another drunken sex orgy in Washington, D.C. back in 1964. The sex acts were both natural and unnatural. Not sure what that means. According to the FBI, and were performed for the entertainment of onlookers. In 1960, this was a pattern for King, who, according to the FBI, has continued to carry on such sexual aberrations secretly while holding himself out to the public view as a moral leader in religious conviction. I mean, that's fair. The FBI documents reveal that King had sired a baby girl out of wedlock with a wife of a prominent dentist in Los Angeles. Dun, dun, dun. King was known to participate in orgies, especially those involving prostitutes, usually paid for by grant money. The National Civil Rights Museum, which is putting on display in 2 bedrooms of Lorraine Motel where King stayed that night before he was shot, has declined to depict in any way the occupants of those rooms. Doing so, according to exhibit designer Gerald Esterhold, would be close to blasphemy. The reason? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spent his last day on earth having sexual intercourse with 2 women at a motel and physically beating and abusing a third. Let's see the substantiation on that. J. Edgar Hoover personally saw it that documented information on King's degeneracy and the communist connections was provided to the president and to Congress. Conclusive information from the FBI files was also provided to major newspapers and news wire services. Were the American people informed of King's real nature? All right. Not sure I buy some of that, although these documents that were released from the JFK stuff seems to be pretty well substantiated. Very interesting. So, on that note, I still believe that he did a fair amount of good stuff, regardless of the articles he copy and pasted for his PhD dissertation, which I don't blame you for. And if you're getting into sexual orgies, who cares? Although the fact that you're married with children probably isn't a good look and you shouldn't do that. And yeah, being a prominent leader of a, religious situation while doing those things, probably not a good look either. But I don't think that takes away from, the substantial impact that he gave during the times of segregation, right? There's a reason. Now, obviously the reason they gave him a federal holiday is because of the ideologies and impact that he had, but also was a little bit due to the fact that maybe they murdered him. That could have been it too.
The Adams Archive.